Hello and welcome to the show. One of my favourite cafes, Screamin Beans in Springfield, is closing. I found out this terrible news the other day when I went there, and they were only selling coffee. They were you could only pay by the Pay ID on the phone. They didn't have the normal FPOS. And when I checked out their Facebook, it turns out that even though they were an award-winning cafe, they were packed nearly every time I would ever go there. They won a Coffee Commune award for the best cafe in the western suburbs, broadly defined, of Brisbane. Despite that, as the owner noted in his Facebook post, the costs of running the cafe, the wages, the rent were just too much for it to be a sustainable operation, which was just incredibly disappointing. And I think it speaks to, its evidence of the high cost of doing business in Australia, and partly, not entirely, it's related to wages costs. So the statement from the owner said that it was a range of factors, but I've no doubt that the increases in wages that have been legislated, that seem to be handed down from our Fair Work Commission without sufficient regard to the economic circumstances affecting businesses, the ability of businesses to pay for those wage increases. I think that's a significant part of it. And at the same time, we've also got the additional complication of governments our federal government requiring businesses to pay the superannuation for employees on the day that at the same time as their regular pay rather than every quarter. And this is more of a timing issue, but it could have implications for the cash flow of small businesses. So what all of these factors do, in my view, is that it makes it harder for business. And I can understand why Screamin Beans has had to shut, but in an economy where we had more rational policy settings, where we didn't have a regulator handing down wage increases with little regard to the economic circumstances, we would have fewer good businesses like this closing. I'm absolutely certain about this. And when I alerted Phil DeBella to this, so Phil is a coffee guru. He had his own coffee range of coffee that he sold many years ago, DeBella Coffee, and he's still in the coffee game. He's got his coffee commune over at Abbotsford Road in Bowen Hills. I told Phil about this, and he said that, look, yep, it's tough out there. According to his figures, he does regular surveys. 1 in 8 cafes are looking to close. They're only on 3% profit margin at best. So it's just a really diabolical set of circumstances facing these cafes and other hospitality businesses in Australia. And that's going to be the focus of this episode, along with another Fair Work Commission decision that is in the works relating to the gig economy, where it looks like there will be imposed upon the platform companies such as Uber, DoorDash, partly with their consent. They seem to be going along with this, probably because they feel that they could get a worse option if they don't cooperate in some way. Essentially, we'll see a significant increase in the required earnings of delivery drivers, and that will either result in, it'll flow through to consumers in in some way. It could flow through to the drivers. There'll be fewer opportunities for them to make a living. So what we're seeing is additional regulation which will impose costs upon the economy. So I'm not saying we shouldn't have, there may not be scope for some regulation of the labour market, but you have to recognise the trade-offs involved. And it looks to me like our regulator, the Fair Work Commission, isn't doing that very adequately. And this came up in a conversation that I had with John Humphreys, Chief Economist at Australian Taxpayers Alliance, on our regular live stream, the Australian Taxpayers Alliance live stream that we do every Thursday night, Australian time. So if you can, please check that out. We take questions, we take comments in the chat, and we like to go through those and respond where we can. Okay, so before we get into the episode, I should thank our regular sponsor, Lumo Coffee. So I'm holding up some of their Brightside beans, seriously healthy organic coffee. It has triple the antioxidants of regular coffee. And Tim, who's been on the show before, so some of you, if you're a regular listener, you may remember Tim. It's Tim Hughes's coffee company, and it's roasted out at the coffee commune that I just mentioned, Phil DeBella's Coffee Commune at Bowen Hills in Brisbane. And it's a great coffee. The bright side's very smooth to drink. I love it. And I recommend it. Economics Explored listeners can get a 10% discount. And if you use the promo code that's in the show notes, then you'll get the discount, and you'll also help support the show to a small extent. So please, consider some Lumo coffee. Righto, so that's the setup for this episode, and to kick it off, I will play the relevant segment from my live stream with John Humphreys, so you can get a sense of what the issues are and how economists think about those issues. Okay, so let's get into it now.
Gene, you said there was some news in the labour market world. Apparently, there's been a recent ruling.
The Fair Work Commission is foreshadowing that they're going to agree to 25% higher earnings for the food delivery drivers. So the Fair Work Commission's handed down a landmark draft decision proposing world-first minimum standards for on-demand food delivery, including a 25% pay rise and baseline rates of $31.30 to $32 an hour. And this compares with something, I think it was like $23 or something on average that they're earning now. We're going to see an increase in the costs of delivery of the apps. And I mean, as you pointed out, I mean, maybe they can increase the charges, but then the other possibility is that it's increasing the cost of labor, and they're going to end up reducing the amount of hours that can be worked by these, or they'll limit the number of people who get onto the platform at any one time so that they can ensure that the people who are on earn this higher rate. And so that's going to reduce the opportunities for people to earn money in the gig economy. So look, I'm not a fan of the decision. It seems to be, these apps or these new employment opportunities were made available because of the fact that they could, in a way, get out of some of our employment regulations that are restrictive and cost jobs ultimately. So, I think that will be a very consequential decision. I think it could end up annoying a lot of consumers.
Well, undoubtedly, the most obvious consequence of this is that the cost of food deliveries will go up.
Yep.
So obviously, someone's going to pay the price. And it's always assumed that whoever is the person you hate the most is the one that's going to pay whatever new tax or costs you impose. But of course, there is a way for that cost to be spread around, and it normally is spread around. Some is borne by the owner of capital, which is what everyone hopes. It's the owner of capital that'll get screwed. because we don't want people investing in capital, God forbid. But it's not always the owner of capital that gets screwed. It's sometimes it can be the customers. Actually, it often is the customers. A lot of costs get passed on through to the customer, and sometimes costs are borne by the worker in ways that are unexpected. Sometimes, and I'm not just talking here, I'm talking in general, right? Not just for the Uber Eats and what have you. But there are cases where as you increase an employee's benefit in one area, they lose benefits in another area, right? They're given a harder work or more dangerous work, or they're taken away some other element or some other benefit they had. And of course, one obvious consequence is you put up the cost of Uber Eats. If then fewer people buy Uber Eats, then fewer delivery jobs will exist by definition, right?
Exactly.
So that's how behavioral responses work. And look, I think you really hit the nail on the head here. You mentioned the point about this whole little micro industry emerged as a workaround of previous overregulation. And it seems we're like in an arms race here, a battle. The regulators stifle the death out of something. An innovator comes along and finds a way around it. It then booms. It booms, right? I mean, this is the one thing we know. This is an industry. This is now a large industry, not because it was regulated well, but because they got away from the regulation. And the regulators go, oh shit, something's out of my control. I guess I better get more control over it. They stamp their boot on it. It becomes very nice and regimented and very clean. A central planner can, put all of the different parts in their spreadsheet and make it look all very orderly and neat and tidy. But it's lost its innovative appeal. So I'm also skeptical of this. And I'm also just in general, the idea that the central planner sees something outside of their control and goes and brings it back in their tent. It is something I lament. So, look, by the way, this also comes off the back of the recent announcements of increasing the minimum wage, which I believe was increased by 6%. I think it was about 6%, the minimum wage, which of course is going to be more than inflation and productivity. So that's going to create other similar issues. That's maybe not as big an issue because 6% is not as big as what was the implicit percentage you said there for Uber Eats? Like a 50% minimum wage increase.
About 25%. Yeah.
From 20 something up to 30 something. Anyway, that's going to be noticeable. So Aussie, the 4.75% one, that's for award wages. So that's for anyone who's got a sort of government contracted wage above the minimum wage, right? So we have a very convoluted, messy system in Australia where we don't just have one minimum wage. We've got a minimum wage baseline, and then depending on what industry you're in and which unions have got their secretary elected to the Labor Party Senate, et cetera, all of these backroom deals, you can get extra award minimum wages. And those went up by 4.75. The minimum went up by 6%. But one thing I wanted to note about that minimum wage increase, and this has been a bugbear of mine for a while, when people look at the minimum wage, they look at, understandably, the wage, right? The gross wage, the actual amount you get paid. If the real motivation here was the well-being of the worker, what you'd be interested in is what I call your net wage, or you'd want to know what is your net minimum wage change, right? The change in your well-being because of the change in the minimum wage. And they are not the same thing, right? Because you've got a gross wage change. What that's going to do for a lot of people is, firstly, you have to pay more tax on that extra, but also for a lot of these people receiving part welfare, and they're going to receive less welfare. And it's good for the government to pay less welfare. But from the context of that person receiving this wage change, you give them, say, $5, you give them $100 extra a week, they're not necessarily going to benefit $100 a week. Indeed, in this case here, there are some people who you give them this $100, if it was a $100 wage increase, they only benefit $33. Right, so I was working out before, depending on the situation you're in, but some families from this minimum wage increase will say that they'll think they're getting a 6% increase, they're only getting a 2% increase. Right, so I would encourage people to look through this gross minimum wage facade through to the net outcome. Once you look at the net minimum wage, once that is your goal, you'll notice there's two ways to achieve it. And this is the magic of this idea. I really like this. Someone should, Angus Taylor, Pauline Hanson, steal this idea. If once you're looking at the net minimum wage change, there's two ways to achieve it. One is to increase the gross minimum wage, which is already what they do. but you could also achieve the exact same outcome by just cutting taxes. Right? That would also achieve the same net minimum wage outcome, right? So you can now achieve this outcome two different ways. You can realize the truth of what they're doing, firstly, because transparency is always good. And then you can notice that there are better ways sometimes to achieve the same outcome.
But from the
So,
government's point of view, if you just think from their point of view, it's better if it comes from the employer, isn't it, rather than cutting
yeah,
the taxes? That's how they're looking at it. Yeah. Oh,
absolutely. And that
aren't
is
we
their
good
rationale.
for
And I
the
understand
employer?
that. But
Yeah, these greedy capitalists can pay for the higher wages. Yeah.
well, that's the
Is that
assumption that that's who ends up paying, right?
yes.
Instead of it being passed on to
Yeah.
consumer or lost jobs or worst
Yeah.
working standards or the rest of it. Look, if they want to tax those greedy employers, then they could introduce a thing called a company tax. Oh wait, we've got one of those. So,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, so
And
it is
the issue
the minimum wage is effectively just a very badly designed, badly targeted, inefficient, badly directed company tax. Right? It
yeah.
really can. You can recreate a minimum wage by just taxing businesses in certain really stupid ways, and then handing back that money as a welfare payment to the workers for that company. And if you designed it like that, it would be very clear how dumb that policy is. But if you hide that policy in the language of minimum wage, suddenly everyone thinks the exact same policies are a good idea.
Yeah. And
Uh,
we already have practically either the second or third highest minimum wage in the OECD, don't we, relative to median earnings? So
yeah.
we've already got a very high minimum wage, certainly
Oh, I
relative to
think it
the
was just in absolute terms, in nominal amounts, I think it's the second highest in the world,
yeah. Mm.
I believe. So, I
Yeah,
mean,
I
I
can't
haven't
remember.
looked at that for 2 years, so that data could be,
It sounds
uh
right. I think I may have used that figure in one of my papers. Certainly in the ballpark. Okay, I hope you found that informative. John's got a really good way of framing the issues of analysing issues using uh, economic tools, and I really appreciate that. That's why I enjoy doing the live stream with him. I think that was very good. Uh, another economist, I think, who is very good at explaining the economic theory of in simple terms is Thomas Sowell. So if you listen to the show, I'm sure I've mentioned Thomas Sowell before, very distinguished American economist, and I quoted him in a paper that I wrote for Centre for Independent Studies on the regulation of the gig economy, among other issues. It was closing opportunities, not closing loopholes, which was the government's legislation was closing loopholes. That's what they called it. But I was worried that this is going to reduce opportunities for employment, and it's not necessarily going to improve the situation of Australians more broadly. So some of the gig economy workers will benefit, but then at the same time, there will be fewer opportunities. There will be fewer opportunities for them to work. They might end up working fewer hours because of this impact on the demand that that John talked about. If prices increase, if they charge the consumers, and then that results in a lower amount of demand, or alternatively, if the gig economy platforms start constraining to a significant extent the number of drivers or delivery people who can come onto the platform at any one time, so that those people on the platform earn the required minimum earnings. So it's going to have an adverse impact on them in some way too. And in that closing loopholes paper, I quoted one of my favourite passages from Thomas Sowell's book on, I think it's Economic Facts. I'll have to put the right name in the show notes. I should have should have noted it down, but I can't remember it off the top of my head. It's a great book that he's written on the essential principles of economics, and it's about the zero sum fallacy. And what I see with a lot of this labour market regulation that's being imposed from above is that it presumes this zero-sum fallacy. And this is how Thomas Sowell puts it, the fallacious assumption that economic transactions are a zero-sum process in which what is gained by someone is lost by someone else. So there's this assumption that, the only reason these platform companies, if they're making the profit, then that means that the workers are missing out on it. And I think what that's missing is that the workers are benefiting from the employment opportunities that are being provided, and there's a mutually beneficial transaction, and that's where both parties are better off. And what Sowell goes on to write is that this presumption or this assumption, it fails to recognise that, in his words, voluntary economic transactions, whether between employer and employee, tenant and landlord, or international trade, they would not continue to take place unless both parties were better off making those transactions than not making them. The government, and he also explains, and I think this is in my words rather than his, the government, they may prefer a different set of terms for those transactions, but if the government goes and imposes its own terms, then there's a risk that the acceptable terms for both parties no longer overlap in many instances, and then the total amount of opportunities that will be exploited, the total employment, the total number of hours on the platform, that will fall. So that's the risk. The more we constrain the trades that can be made, then the fewer mutually beneficial trades there will be. This is just strikes me as incredibly logical, and it seems to be something that the Fair Work Commission doesn't fully understand. So I continue to be very concerned about some of the decisions we're seeing. I'm concerned that they're not consistent with the current economic circumstances, where we are concerned about a slowing economy, where we're concerned about real reductions in living standards that we've seen because of the high inflation that we've had and wages not keeping up with it. So I continue to be very concerned. And it's not just in the gig economy where there are concerns about what's happening in labour markets. There's also an issue now with our most profitable export industry, iron ore. There was a good column by Michael Stutchbury, who's the head of the Centre for Independent Studies, where I'm an adjunct fellow. Michael wrote about what's happening in the Pilbara with at Port Hedland. So at BHP's Port Hedland iron export ore terminal, which is the world's biggest iron ore loading port, and there's a stalled enterprise agreement. So this is in Western Australia, and Michael called this a case of punching ourselves in the face, a dispute made more likely by workplace laws that have expanded union right of entry powers and enforced same job, same pay rules across genuinely different work arrangements. And this is something that I covered in that closing loopholes paper for Centre for Independent Studies. So I'll put a link to Michael's comments in the show notes, so check those out too. It's another example of how these regulations which are being imposed, or these laws and regulations which are being imposed for reasons that on face value sound fine. Okay, we should be trying to improve. It's good to look after workers. I mean, no one wants workers to be exploited. I think that's That's true. That you can't argue against that. So what we have is laws and regulations that are imposed for seemingly good reasons. However, they have these unintended consequences, these adverse consequences. There are trade-offs when we start imposing these restrictions on the trades that would otherwise occur. Okay, that's this week's episode. It's a bit shorter than the normal ones. However, I hope that you got something out of it. I think we covered some important principles of economics, and I liked the way that John framed the issues when we talked about them, and I hope you found that segment useful. If you want to check out the full episode, the full ATA live stream, I'll put a link in the show notes. It'd be great to have you along to one of our live streams in the future, and you can hop in the chat and make comments, ask questions. It's a lot of fun. And again, Lumo Coffee sponsored this episode, so if you're looking for some tasty coffee that's rich in antioxidants, then go to lumo.com. There's a promo code for Economics Explorers. You can get a 10% discount. So please consider getting some Lumo. Righto, that brings us to the end of the episode. I will see you next time.